there is a little bit of truth when they say sugar feeds cancer, and it's not just you eat sugar and cancer starts. So the real issue here is not about the sugar you're consuming. It's about how does your body react to sugar, right? So I'm going to repeat that. It's not about the sugar itself. It is about how does your body react to the sugar, because that means that there's an individualized aspect to it all that we can take a stand in and have some control over. All right, so today I'm going to talk about something that really frustrates me, which probably means that it frustrates you guys like 10 times more than that. And you probably already have an idea. You read the title, but we're going to talk about why sugar doesn't feed cancer. And I'm going to go into how does sugar actually work in the body, how there is a little bit of truth in what people are saying when they say sugar feeds cancer, but we don't need to come at it from this all or nothing perspective. Also, it's a completely different way we want to look at it. We can still have chocolate cake or cookies or whatever our favorite sugary filled dessert is without being completely afraid of these things encouraging cancer or health related consequences. So we're going to talk through all that today. I'm going to basically, again, describe what sugar is in the body. What does healthfully consuming sugar mean? And how are sugar and cancer related? So let's go through that today. So this is the first episode back. We're going to call it season 2. I don't really know how seasons work in podcasts. I do medicine, not necessarily podcasting, but here we are. So season 2, and we're going to continue on with these episodes. So the real issue here is not about the sugar you're consuming. It's about how does your body react to sugar, right? So I'm going to repeat that. It's not about the sugar itself. It is about how does your body react to the sugar, because that means that there's an individualized aspect to it all that we can take a stand in and have some control over. And it's not just you eat sugar and cancer starts. So let's talk about how sugar is broken down in the body. And when I talk about sugar, a lot of this is going to have to do, I'm going to basically say sugar and glucose interchangeably. Sugar is just easier to say than glucose sometimes. It can get a little tongue twisty, but they're basically the same thing. So whenever you eat food, some of it may be carbohydrates. So you got food, you have macronutrients within food. Those are your protein, carbs, and fats. And so we're going to talk mostly about carbs today. So if you eat food that contains carbohydrates or carbs, that gets broken down in your body, eventually leading to the formation of sugar, aka glucose, in the blood. So that's blood glucose. Now, there are other ways that sugars can be formed by eating even fat and protein. But just to kind of keep it simple, this is not going to be a biology course or anything like that today. We're just going to go through the main way that sugar is formed in the body, and that is through the consumption of carbohydrates. So whenever you consume carbohydrates, what happens is it starts breaking down in your mouth a lot of the time. It starts to form smaller molecules. So you're breaking it down to smaller molecules of carbohydrates, and you're going to make sugar that's eventually going to get leaked into your bloodstream. Once it enters the bloodstream, it doesn't just hang out there. It needs to be sucked into the cells of your body in order to be burnt as energy. And this is why it's not just cancer cells that use sugar as energy. All of your cells require some source of energy. The biggest form of that would come from sugar and carbohydrates. So what happens is you get the sugar building in your bloodstream, and in response, your body knows to release something called insulin. And insulin is kind of like a bus. It will go and pick up the sugar in the bloodstream, and it will deliver it to the cells and go within the cells and be like, hey, cells, your delivery is here. Here's your energy. The sugar hops off, and then it gets burnt as energy. Kind of like delivering wood, I guess, to a home, and then you create a wood, like you put the wood in the fireplace, and then you build your heat. So you're delivering the sugar, which could be like the wood on the bus, gets to the home, which is the cell, and then you put it in the fireplace and it gets burnt as energy or heat in the case of the fireplace. So you got your glucose, you've got your insulin, and you've got your fireplace. It's being burnt in the cell. So the thing is that it's not necessarily that the sugar is causing problems here. It's more about the number of sugar molecules as well as the number of times the delivery needs to happen. or how much sugar, like how often is sugar being raised in your bloodstream. So if you have a little bit amount of sugar being delivered, then you're going to use that up. You're going to burn it up. It's going to be good. Your cells want it, need it, and then you're good to go. But if you are constantly consuming an excessive amount of carbohydrates, then the carbohydrates are going to build up. Things are going to get backed up. You're going to have so much sugar hanging out in the bloodstream that the insulin's going to get tired. You're going to run out of insulin buses. There's not going to be enough to kind of deliver it. And that's when the problem happens. Another time when the problem happens is when insulin, I guess I kind of alluded to it, it gets tired and it starts to ignore the signals, or even the cells get tired of receiving a delivery and it starts to ignore insulin buses. So you've got sugar building up in the body. Even whenever sugar is not building up in the body, your insulin, your cells, they're like, I don't really want this anymore. Anyway, I've had enough. I've heard this story before. You've been knocking too many times. I'm just going to ignore you now. And then the sugar, again, is building up even more in the body. So there's a many different layered approach here to how sugar and consumption of sugar and carbohydrates becomes a problem. And just very quick before I get too much into this, there are different ways to form sugar in the body. So you can consume fruits, which have some sugar in them, which might be a little bit more healthy for you, or consume some cake and things like that, which obviously has a little bit more straight up sugar as opposed to the different types of sugars and the fibers and things like that that might be in fruit. And whenever you're having cake as opposed to fruit, for cake, you might have a lot of sugar being delivered in a short period of time. Whereas you have fruit, you have your fiber in that's going to slow the delivery. It kind of, I don't know, prevents the movement of the sugar into the bloodstream a little. It just delays the delivery of it over time. So then you've got the fiber delaying the delivery, so there's not so much of a spike. So getting into the problem being that with sugar, it's the height of the spike and the quick release of sugar that is the problem. So a cake would cause a high spike and a quick release, whereas a piece of fruit would cause a smaller spike and a longer release of the sugar into the bloodstream over time. So we've got high spikes. We've got multiple spikes if you're having a piece of cake with every meal, for example. That's a problem. We have the problem of the insulin buses ignoring the sugar and not delivering it. And then we got a problem of the cells ignoring the insulin and the sugar and not accepting it. So this all happens. This is more chronic blood sugar dysregulation, where we've got too much carbohydrate consumption or sugar consumption. We got too much at one time, and then your body just starts to go a little bit haywire and not carry out its function adequately. So you can kind of see where I'm going here, I hope, where it's not necessarily about the sugar itself. It is about over consuming the sugar, and then mostly it is about your body and its ability to react or not react to the sugar being delivered. So we can make a difference when it comes to sugar and cancer by making a difference in terms of how our body's going to react to the sugar, to the insulin. We can change those things with our nutrition, with exercise, with stress management, with sleep even. All of these things can impact how our body metabolizes and reacts to blood sugar and make it a more optimal place for our body to be anti-cancer and to handle some sugar. Some sugar will not be a problem with causing cancer or encouraging cancer to grow. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense so far. I just want to quickly go into one more molecule here before I go into like why sugar is an actual problem with cancer. And this is insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1. IGF-1 gets released whenever insulin is chronically high. So whenever the buses start to hang out in the blood for too long, maybe the cells are ignoring the signals and delivery of the buses, and the buses are just like, well, what do? I just drive around. And like, well, I'm going to bring in IGF-1 then, because it seems like for whatever reason we need to bring in some more backup here. So they start to call in IGF-1, and IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor, can be a problem in high amounts or consistent, constant amounts as well, where it can be encouraging more growth, more proliferation. It can also make it harder for, if there are any cancer cells hanging out, it can make it harder for these cancer cells to die during, like, with the usual process of apoptosis, which is this programmed cell death. I did a whole episode on IGF-1. It's episode 8. If you want to go back and listen to that, I already did. I spent a whole episode talking about how can we reduce the growth or the release of IGF-1. What can we do about that? What is its actual impacts on the body? So I did that in episode 8 if you want to go check out a little bit more detail on that. So why and how does blood sugar actually encourage these pro-cancer processes in the body? So we know it's a problem, and probably a lot of you know that it leads to diabetes over time, or it's a part of having diabetes. And also, you probably know that it just blanket statement can lead to inflammation. But what does that even mean? So, whenever you have too much glucose being chronically elevated, so if you got big spikes, or if you just got consistent spikes throughout the day, then you're going to encourage more IGF-1, more growth factors to be released. It is going to release or increase more reactive oxygen species. This is mostly done through encouraging more insulin to be made as well. These mitochondria, which are little parts of all of your cells that help to create energy, they're going to become overworked because they're constantly kind of receiving these deliveries that they don't need. They're just going to keep pumping out, making more energy, but the energy is not going to be very useful energy. It's going to cause reactive oxygen species to even target mitochondria. And these reactive oxygen species, the mitochondria damage, that's going to damage your metabolism. It's going to make it harder for your body to work. In turn, it can create advanced glycolylated end products, AGEs. They damage tissue. They damage all types of tissue. And we're also going to have immune system shifts too. So the glucose, the insulin, it has an impact on your immune system. It has an impact on causing tissue damage. It causes mitochondria to become damaged. And these are just a couple of pathways. And the more damage that happens, the more opportunity for pro-cancerous changes to occur. And if we have more inflammation, more damage, we have more pro-cancerous changes within cells happening. We're dampening the immune response. That immune response being a big factor in coming to find and fight cancer cells before they become a problem. So if you have your immune system's dampened or it's just not working optimally, you got these precancerous changes going on. They're not being targeted and killed off by your immune system. So they're going to have the more opportunity to grow in this pro-growth environment with the IGF-1 and the other growth factors that are going to encourage these precancerous cells to go more cancer and then divide and conquer and become cancer over time. So I just want to again bring it back to the fact that yes, there's some truth in how sugar feeds cancer, sugar causes cancer, but it's more about how your body reacting to sugar can lead to cancer. And its overconsumption of sugar can lead to cancer. Because there are research studies where they have removed sugar completely and carbohydrates completely from people's diets, and they haven't seen a difference in terms of the cancer growth. Um, so if we are having these human studies where we're taking someone and measuring, they already have a cancer in the body, we're removing all this from their diet so they can't make sugar necessarily anymore, and we're not seeing a reduction in the growth, then it's probably not just the sugar being a problem. There's always multiple factors when it comes to cancer starting and growing. And two, sugar cannot be something that everyone needs to be afraid of all the time. And we need to stop scaring cancer survivors when it comes to foods on their plate. It is way more unhealthy to be a cancer survivor and be afraid of your food than it is to consume a little bit of sugar now and then. Because if you're afraid of your food all the time, we have so many women come to us and they are barely eating anything. They are second guessing everything that they eat. They are in constant state of fear and anxiety. That is so bad for you. I'd rather you eat a piece of chocolate cake for sure. There's way less evidence showing that chocolate cake is worse for you than not getting enough nourishment in your body, skipping meals, not eating protein, only eating spinach or whatever it might be. That is worse for you than having a piece of cake now and then. We don't want that to be the case. I'm just going to quickly talk about keto diets as well while I have you here. So we don't necessarily push any particular diet whenever we're working with our clients. We mostly look at their full picture of health and then choose their macronutrients, so their protein, carbs, and fats, and we want to measure that out for them and give them like a goal to reach, and we get them to track their food for a little bit. We also look at specific foods that might be more health promoting. So that's usually certain types of vegetables or fish or nuts and seeds and things like that. So we look at, can you include some of these in your diet? How often would that look like for you based on a lot of times like your cancer diagnosis or your taste preferences? But yeah, we're usually just working on the macronutrients, protein, carbs, and fats. So we don't say everyone should go on a keto diet or everyone should do Mediterranean, even though Mediterranean in general, if you're following a healthy diet, it's probably going to be along the lines of a Mediterranean diet. But we do look at the keto diet sometimes. And I have to say that it's super, super rare that we prescribe it. A big reason being that, yes, the keto diet has shown some benefit in the population of people who have had a cancer diagnosis. Mostly the benefits are for people who are in chemotherapy, and the benefits are seen for reducing the side effects. So, like the fatigue, the nausea, the bowel issues, those kind of impacts are typically reduced when someone's doing a healthy keto diet while in chemotherapy. But there's not a whole lot of information showing benefit outside of someone being in chemotherapy when it comes to cancer reduction and recurrence reduction or reducing cancer growth. And I think that I had a thought there that's kinda gone. Let's see if I can get back to it. But really, really, I think it's because if we do see benefits, this is the thought. If we do see benefits with people on a keto diet, it's typically because we're pulling them out of a diet that's so poor into a diet that's better, that of course they're gonna see a benefit if we're teaching them how to eat less, um toast and bacon for breakfast, even though bacon's a part of keto diet, but we're just teaching them to eat less carbohydrates in general because they're already over consuming it. They're already seeing too many glucose spikes and spikes are too high and they're too often. So their body wasn't reacting well. So if we pull that back and do this keto diet, which if you don't know, it is a higher fat, very low to no carb diet, so then we're seeing less of the glucose spikes, and the spikes are going to be lower because the fat and the proteins that's typically in a keto diet aren't going to have the spikes, the glucose spikes, things like that. So if we're pulling people out of a high carbohydrate diet, which is what most of the population is, putting them in a study on a keto diet, yeah, we're going to see benefits in terms of blood sugar regulation, energy, um, even blood pressure, cholesterol markers, things like that, because their previous diet was usually so bad that we're going to see something better on a keto diet for sure. And we do have a lot of people come to us and they're already on keto diets. And we just want to look at the diet that they're on. And you can totally follow that diet plan if you want, as long as we can make sure that it's serving a good purpose. And usually we test for your blood markers and things like that to make sure it is serving a good purpose for you. But the other problem with keto diets that I have and why we don't use it very often is because it is super difficult. It is a really difficult diet to do when you want to do it healthfully, because a keto diet, if we're going to do it in terms of good nutrition, is not going to be full of bacon and steak and cottage cheese and milk and things like that. That is still not healthy for you. You might see a shift in your cholesterol and your blood sugar and things like that over time, but even longer over time, I would say your body starts to not like that, and we do know that vegetables are good for us, and the keto diet can be pretty vegetable limiting because sometimes there's too many carbohydrates in certain vegetables in order to be a part of the keto diet. So everyone's different. I want you to always hear that, and some people might be fine on a like high red meat, high dairy keto diet. But the majority of the population, we can't ignore the fact that a lot of colorful vegetables are good for us, like good variety. That a lot of vegetables are carbohydrates. We know that fruit is good for us, and that wouldn't be in a keto diet. We know that excessive consumption of red meats and processed meats is definitely not good for us. We might use certain diets to change our metabolism and the way that our body reacts to food, like glucose, over time. But I really think it's more of a short term diet plan. Again, most of the research is shown only to get people through a lot of treatments with fewer side effects. It doesn't necessarily decrease tumor burden. Um, and if we are going to encourage someone to do it, it has to be the right person to ask them to do this diet. Or it could be that they struggle with it, but it's only a short-term diet, and then we can ease them into a more sustainable nutrition plan over time. Sorry, I went into that a little bit longer than I wanted to, but I hope that was helpful and gives a little bit of a perspective on how we see diets and assigning diets and how your uniqueness can play a role. And I just know that a lot of people are listening to this and they're like, I do a keto diet and I feel great and I do have dairy all the time, every day. Um, and that could be the case. And I don't want you to dismiss anything else that I'm saying. I just want you to think a little bit more broadly, I guess. So going back to glucose and glucose spikes and how our body is really the factor here that can impact how we react to sugar and carbohydrates and be the difference. And it's not just sugar feeds cancer. What are some symptoms that people might have if they have a poor reaction, like their body's just not reacting the best to a lot of sugar signals? Often we have a lot of women who have zero symptoms, and this is not meant to scare you, but we have a lot of women, and when I say a lot, I'm not exaggerating. We actually do have a lot of women who have zero symptoms, who actually eat very healthy and even work out and do all these great things. But we do their blood work, and it comes back that their fasting insulin is high or their IGF-1 is high, even though their HbA1c, which is typically the only blood marker for sugar that people will measure in a conventional protocol, that might look normal. But again, like we've seen the fasting insulin come high and the IGF-1 come back high. And often it is because we need to build more muscle in these women. We need to teach about blood sugar balanced meals and not just eating. There's a bit of a difference between eating just healthy and eating blood sugar balanced meals. So we need to do a proper combination of protein, carbs, and fats at all of your meals. Maybe we need to reduce the number of carbohydrates overall in your diet, things like that. Um, but yeah, like it's very surprising, and I'm very glad that we do a lot of blood work testing in our women. And I have to say, a lot of them come back normal. So I want you to think about how it's going to come back normal. But I think it's good to have numbers and to know where things are at without just going based on how are people feeling a lot of the time. Because I think we can do a little better and dig a little deeper for sure. But so yeah, some women don't have any symptoms of blood sugar dysregulation. Um, a lot of people, a lot of symptoms are more like fatigue. So you might have some energy crashes throughout the day. Again, it's more like rule in, rule out. There's a lot of causes of fatigue. It might not be your blood sugar, but if we see that symptom, we're going to want to treat it because it's making your life miserable. Let's think about blood sugar as well as other factors too. Joint pain could be a factor too, because if we're causing the immune system dysregulation, we're increasing reactive oxygen species. We're just basically causing inflammation, which can show up in your joints and cause joint pain. Brain fog, because you're not getting enough energy to your brain, or your brain's not able to kind of use energy appropriately in order to allow you to think very straight. Sometimes there's hormone disruption. But basically, I wouldn't just say, I have no symptoms of blood sugar regulation, it must be fine. In a perfect world, we would be testing your fasting insulin, fasting glucose, IGF-1, and HbA1c. And often, what we recommend when we're working with our women in the roadmap to recovery is we are getting people to optimal levels on their blood work. And then once they're optimal, we want to retest every 6 months to make sure that things are staying great and optimal. And we want to be on it if anything were to start showing patterns of sugar dysregulation in this case. Um, so again, I just want to be aware, and you know what, cholesterol panel is important to check, but I just want you to be aware of other markers to check on your blood work above and beyond HbA1c. I don't want you to take no symptoms at face value. I am very data oriented, and if you appreciate what I'm chatting about, you're probably a little bit more data oriented as well. And let's dig into that information a little bit more deeply. There's a certain level of well, actually, let's talk now about how do we manage blood sugar. And coming back to our optimal goals being, we don't want high spikes, so a high fast release of glucose into your bloodstream, and we don't want consistent spikes over time, a high release of glucose into your bloodstream multiple times a day. We don't want those things. So those are two things we're going to work on. So how do we work on that? So we work on that through building muscle, because muscle can metabolize the sugar a lot faster so it doesn't hang out. That's why strength training is so important. And this is why I always harp on how walking is great. And in fact, walking for like 15, 20 minutes post meal. So if you have a lunch or a dinner, even breakfast, you have the opportunity to go for like a 15, 20-minute walk, then go for it because it helps to bring your blood sugar spikes down. But walking is not necessarily enough because I don't see the muscle being built the same as if someone were going to be doing strength training. So, when it comes to keeping cancer from coming back, we always want to look at building muscle, not just for the fact of building muscle, looking good, getting to a healthy weight, but it really helps to balance your blood sugar. And if we're going to manage those blood sugar spikes and reduce the frequency of spikes throughout the day, we need muscle because the muscle is going to break those glucose molecules down, or in fact, it's just going to shunt it into the cells where it needs to be burnt for energy. It's going to burn it off and it's going to handle those spikes and handles those frequent bumps of sugar throughout your day so that we're not having that happen. It helps your body to react better to the sugar. So I don't know if I've harped on this a lot on my podcast yet, but I want to become the person who says walking is not enough to keep cancer from coming back because we need to see women building muscle. And walking can do that to a certain extent, but then you have to add in a weighted vest, or maybe you need to do some arm weights while walking. You need to make it more intense. You need to do more hills or whatever it might be. Um, because I think we sometimes take it too easy on our population when it comes to exercise. We are really a sedentary type of people, and we no longer do hard physical labor or anything like that, which is good. We don't necessarily want to do that, but we also have people sitting on their butts all day, myself included a lot of the time. And we see benefits in studies for walking because people aren't doing anything and it's just getting us something better. But I don't want to get someone to just something better. I want to get them to the best. And I don't want you to also see what I'm just saying right now is we want to get you to the best. So you have to be strength training and training for a marathon and doing all these extreme activities. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I want you to walk if you can walk, but I want you to start to train your brain to think, we need to do more. What does that look like? Let's do this. You have to start building muscle. And usually we recommend strength training, weightlifting, body weights, whatever it might be. But I have an idea that I'm talking to people anywhere from 20 years old to 80 years old right now. And that's going to look different for you depending on where you're at in terms of your current exercise and activity plans. But I need you to start building muscle because it's going to help your blood sugar, bring it back to blood sugar. So other ways, so I just talked about how walking can lower your blood sugar spikes. Building muscle lowers your spikes and also decreases the frequency of them throughout the day. Um, if you have good gut health, that can also help you to metabolize sugars and respond better to insulin and things like that as well. Um, I alluded to it earlier, like blood sugar balanced meals, combining protein, carbs, and fats all together at your every meal or snack can really help to balance that blood sugar. And I'm going to try to describe something that I hope creates a bit of a visual. If it doesn't, if it gets a little confusing, just ignore everything I'm saying for the next minute or two. But this is how I'm very visual. This is how I picture sugar, protein, carbs, sorry, sugar, protein, and fat. I picture a high school hallway and we've got protein and fat. And protein and fat are like the jocks. They're very like buff. They're very full of muscle and they take up a lot of room in the hallway. And then we've got these sugar molecules who are scrawny little things, maybe even children in the high school for whatever reason, but they're scrawny little things and they're this zooming through the hallway. So if we have more jocks, more protein and fat in the hallway becomes smaller and smaller, and it's harder for those sugar molecules to zoom through the hallway. They kind of bounce around. They have to squeeze through the jocks and the big protein and fat molecules that are in this hallway. So if we're having meals that are combining protein, fat, and carbohydrates, it's going to slow the ability for the carbohydrates to zoom through the blood vessels and get, well, basically get through the stomach into the blood vessels. It's just going to be harder for it to cause these spikes and get higher frequency in terms of too many sugar molecules and too often having spikes in the bloodstream. So that's why I hope that's a little bit of a helpful visual, but that's why combining protein, fat, and even fiber can help whenever you're having more sugary types of carbohydrates, is because these big molecules are like getting in the way of sugar zooming through your blood vessels and causing problems. It's slowing down the breakdown in your body whenever you're eating it, chewing it, digesting it in your stomach, releasing it into the bloodstream. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I'm going to mention it now. Fiber is a type of carbohydrate, but this fiber doesn't break down into sugar or glucose molecules as other types of carbohydrates do. So fiber is technically carbohydrate, but we're not going to consider it breaking down into sugar because it doesn't. We're not going to consider it like a carbohydrate for most of what I chatted about today. So fiber is like its own category. Makes it hard to explain. I feel like it should just be a fourth macronutrient, but according to the biochemical structure, it probably doesn't make sense. Um, but if we can combine protein, fat and fiber with more of the sugary types of carbohydrates, then that's going to help us not create those big spikes or cause multiple spikes throughout our day or even the hour, whatever it might be. So eating blood sugar balanced meals, 15, 20-minute walk after meals, building muscle, healthy gut microbiome. I feel like I'm missing something, but there's something else there. Overall, reducing your sugary carbohydrate consumption, your sugar in general, of course, is going to help. But I have a feeling a lot of you are pretty healthy already, and that's probably not a factor for you. And it's more like you're afraid of eating any sugar whatsoever. But if you say have your piece of cake now and then, not every day, we probably shouldn't have a piece of cake every day. But having your piece of cake, you're going to want to have it after a big healthy lunch or a big healthy supper, for example. I don't recommend cake in the morning still, despite you being able to potentially make it work with everything with your blood sugar balance meal. I just don't think we should be doing cake in the morning unless it's your birthday and you want to go for it. Reducing sugar and then choosing some sugar alternatives. And I know there's already a lot in this episode to listen to right now, but I don't expect you to take everything to heart and remember every piece of detail. Maybe come back to it another time. But last thing I want to talk about before we let you go for today is maple sugar and maple syrup. Sorry, maple syrup and honey. And they are good alternatives. People ask me about this quite often, but they still act like sugar or like white sugar or table sugar, whatever we call it, in our bodies. They are still sugar. They are still sugary. They're just more natural, I guess you could say. They're less processed. It's just more in its innate nature given form. But you need to treat it like sugar when you're consuming it. So it still has to be alongside some protein, fat, and fiber. And when I say fat, I also want to say healthy fat. Should be a healthier fat. Um, Other things like stevia and monk fruit are probably my favorite kind of like more kind of artificial, but more, they're still natural things, but more along the lines of like how you would use table sugar, I guess sometimes. They don't necessarily spike your blood sugar. I have seen a couple papers showing that stevia, because it creates this sweet taste in your mouth, it kind of can trigger a insulin response in the body, even though it doesn't break down into sugar molecules actually in your bloodstream. It just because it triggers your brain to think, oh, that's sweet, I should probably release some insulin, whereas typically that's not the response. Potentially it might do that, but I think that's almost been debunked, or it just doesn't seem to be like a big issue. So stevia and monk's fruit pretty much don't spike your blood sugar in the big scheme of things. So they can be good alternatives to like sweet and low maybe in your coffee. Again, everyone has their favorite coffee taste, so that might not work for you, but just kind of throwing out some ideas here. But maple sugar, maple syrup, and honey, they do need to consider to be eaten alongside protein, fat, and fiber to balance your blood sugar, because they will cause blood sugar spikes. They are probably still, and I believe they are still, a better alternative to just white sugar, brown sugar. And I'm not going to go fully into why that might be with the fructose and all those kind of factors that are involved. Maybe I'll get an expert in to talk about that at some point. It's more like a biochemistry conversation, I would say. And the stevia monk fruit might be a better alternative. That might not spike your blood sugar. Very unlikely to. Allulose as well is another type of fiber that has a sweetness to it that could potentially have some blood sugar balancing impacts for you too. Stress, last thing, stress can impact, and sleep can impact your blood sugar as well, because they interfere with your insulin signaling, IGF-1, all those factors too. So if we can improve your gut health, your muscle mass, if we can eat blood sugar balanced meals, get activity in, reduce sugar, come off sugar alternatives, reduce stress, and improve your sleep, then you have really good blood sugar balance. So easy, right? I know it's not. But you don't have to do it all right now. You have to do it all at once. You probably don't even have to do it all because you're already doing some of it. So I'm just throwing out all the different ideas and basically proving to you that we have control over how our body reacts to sugar. And it's not just like eat sugar and cause cancer. We have the ability to influence our intake of sugar in a more positive way. All right. So this is not an excuse to go have cinnamon rolls for breakfast, but it is an eye-opening, I think, idea of how sugar doesn't necessarily feed cancer. There's a certain threshold that your body doesn't get spikes. It doesn't get consistent spikes throughout the day. Your body can react and have a big difference, and you can still have a piece of cake sometimes and not see that blood sugar problem coming on. If you want to learn a little bit more about blood work and measuring things, I do, and even like how to improve these markers even further. What are the optimal levels for HbA1c, fasting insulin, fasting glucose, IGF-1? I have a blood work boot camp coming up. So I do this twice a year. It's coming up in January 2026, and I am hosting it on the 22nd, 23rd, 26th, and 27th. The replay will be available for a short time. If you want to learn more about that, you can go over to flourishaftercancer.com/bootcamp. And I've got more details there about what's involved and how to sign up. And I would love to see you there. I'm going to talk above and beyond just blood sugar. I'm going to talk about inflammatory markers and nutrients and pulling it all together. I'm going to talk about a lot. And I hope to see you there because these trainings, these boot camps, these workshops that I do, it's kind of where I get to go even more into detail and give you some better handouts and take homes and things like that so that it helps to sink in a little bit more for you. So that's flourishaftercancer.com/bootcamp. I'll put the information in the show notes as well. So that is it for today. Thank you very much for joining me, and here's to you flourishing after cancer. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Flourish After Cancer podcast. If you loved this episode, please be sure to leave a review and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Sending all my best your way, Dr. Megan.